On this edition, I'm going to recap Georges St-Pierre versus Carlos Condit. Obviously, UFC 154 was last night, and the main event, honestly, I think lived up to all the hype. Regardless of what the judges scored the fight, I honestly think that both Georges St-Pierre and Carlos Condit brought the best out in each other. Given Georges St-Pierre's circumstances, obviously being out of the octagon for a long time, he came out and he was beyond impressive. And this is something that, I mean, people were questioning, how would Georges St-Pierre come back after his injury? And he was, I don't want to say flawless, but he fought an excellent fight last night. And people also always say the GSP is a sleeping pill, all these other things. He's a boring fighter, he doesn't finish fights. GSP did not finish the fight. Okay? I think there are greater problems in the world than that. But I think it's also the way that you go about fighting the fight. Okay? Georges St-Pierre made a lot of efforts and put a lot of effort into trying to finish in that fight, and it was an exciting fight. It was fight of the night for a reason. It's not a typical, quote-unquote, typical Georges St-Pierre fight that some people don't find entertaining. Some people absolutely love all of Georges St-Pierre's fights, whether they're fans or they actually appreciate the wrestling and grappling that he does, but there's no way you can beat around the bush with this one, as that Georges St-Pierre made the fight exciting last night. I mean, you could say he was a little bit more cautious after the head kick that he took from Carlos Condit, and you could say rightfully so. I mean, he took a big kick to the head, and he was a lot more cautious, more takedown, a lot more ground and pound, but he almost went back to, I don't want to say his old style of fight. I mean, he's always been a guy who's relied on his wrestling, but you know what? He used a lot of stand-up striking first couple of rounds, and he mixed it up. I mean, you could put it this way, is that he fought fire with fire in that fight. I mean, I personally, I may have predicted this fight right, but I would have thought Georges St-Pierre would have tried to wrestle even more than he did last night. I would have thought it would have just been solely wrestling and would not even have tried to mix up his stand-up with Carlos Condit, but he most definitely did, and that's beyond admirable. Carlos Condit, I mean, we saw it the kick. I mean, that Carlos Condit has the ability to finish the fight with one strike in the blink of an eye. And I think that Georges St-Pierre actually did mix it up with Carlos Condit is admirable, and it's impressive. So he didn't finish the fight, but he made pretty darn well sure that he made a very good attempt to try and finish that fight. In regards to Carlos Condit, the guy brought the fight, and Carlos Condit knew he was in a fight after this. And you know what? Georges St-Pierre's face doesn't lie either. Georges St-Pierre was in a fight as well, and it was a really good welcoming back for him to be in the octagon. The energy that was in the octagon, I mean, just the crowd support and everything being that. You know what? I'm not the biggest Georges St-Pierre fan, but I think it was really good to see a guy who was a great ambassador for the sport of mixed martial arts and really just a truly class act have great success both in and out of the octagon last night. And he just has a lot in front of him. So it's good to see people come back from injury and be successful. And once again, with Carlos Condit, Carlos Condit did a lot. He was very tentative in the beginning of the fight, but he still threw a lot of strikes at Georges St-Pierre's way first two rounds. Then he caught the head kick. I mean, two judges scored the third round for Georges St-Pierre, probably the takedowns, but one judge did score the third round for Carlos Condit. I think Carlos Condit made it very interesting in the third round. He definitely made GSP cautious, and GSP usually is in control and practically always confident in all the rounds. So. But really, hats off to Carlos Condit. You could tell that I mean, you lose a title fight. I mean, you lose a fight against the champion. You lose your interim welterweight title. But Carlos Condit, this is a fight that will make him a better mixed martial artist. He has a lot of fighting in front of him. So is Georges St-Pierre. So I mean, they brought out the best in each other, regardless of what the judges scored the fight itself. I thought they brought the best in each other, and I was thoroughly impressed with both guys and how they handled it, both in victory and defeat. So hats off to Carlos Condit and Georges St-Pierre. So what to take away from it? Nick Diaz tweeted that he wasn't impressed by Georges St-Pierre's performance. That's just it's Diaz being Diaz. But I personally think this lays out a perfect foundation for a Condit versus Diaz 2 fight. It makes 100% sense. I know Diaz wants an immediate title fight. People could say that Chael Sonnen talked his way to a title fight, but I think the division needs to move on. This is coming from a diehard Diaz fan. Okay, I do want to see Diaz versus GSP. I think the UFC would most likely pursue that fight, considering the hype and all the trash talk that would build up to it, and just the history that it has, just the past of it. It would make a lot of sense for the UFC to do it, but it would not be the right thing to do in regards to Diaz coming off of a loss, getting suspended, and coming right back in and getting Georges St-Pierre. But you know what? The money is there. I mean, the money value is there. The pay-per-view sales would be there. The buys would be there. And, I mean, the hype is still there. I mean, this is just something that it continues to get talked about. But the fight that makes the most sense, I think, moving forward would be Condit versus Diaz, too. And the one thing I would say about that is that I want to see the Carlos Condit against Georges St-Pierre fight Nick Diaz the second time around. That's not, Carlos Condit won that fight. Okay, I have my disbeliefs, and I think sometimes it was scored differently. It could be scored differently. However, okay, Condit was very strategic. He was very tactical. I want to see the aggressive guy that was fighting Georges St-Pierre if he is to fight Nick Diaz again, because I want to see the dog fight. Okay, it's not something that'll be 100% guaranteed. This fight isn't something that's been matched up, but I want to see the real fight. Okay, I know strategy, game plan is a big part of the game. I want to see the real Diaz versus Condit fight the second time around. I just want to see these two guys go at it. And if someone gets finished, it gets finished. It could be one of the greatest fights of all time. And that's a bold statement. But you know what? Those guys both have two styles that can make an exciting fight. And it can live up to all the hype that we all thought the fight would be at UFC 143. And Georges St-Pierre moving forward, I mean, I know a lot of talks about the Silva versus GSP fight. And, you know, I know people, it's a big divide. Okay, one, I think that, you know, GSP versus Anderson Silva, I mean, it could happen. I mean, I personally don't have interest in the fight. Okay, and I do not have interest in GSP versus Silva. Will I buy it if the fight's announced and there is a fight for these two? Of course I'm going to watch it. Okay, that's just absolute nonsense if I didn't. But I do not have any interest right now. Until that fight is made, until that matchup is made, I see a lot of more possibilities for Georges St-Pierre. I think Anderson Silva, I mean, let's put it this way. Anderson Silva has not defended the middleweight title since July 7th at UFC 148. And, you know, it's not due to injury. It's not due to anything. Obviously, he fought against Bonner to save the last card, but at UFC 153. But I want to see Anderson Silva defend the title at middleweight one more time. I want to see Georges St-Pierre fight at welterweight one more time. There's just I get that super fights sell. I get that people want to see super fights, but it's not the expense of holding up the division and log jamming them. And I want to see a super fight just as much as all of you guys do. Okay, but I want to see the divisions move forward as well. There's a lot of fighters in middleweight right now that quote-unquote consider themselves contenders. There's a lot of fighters at welterweight right now. They're chomping at the bits to go and get a shot at the title as well. I mean, that's what I want to see. Okay, and you're asking Georges St-Pierre to go right into a super fight after coming off of being out of the octagon for a long time after injury, and he just gets Condit, and he fights exceptionally, but the guy's getting his feet wet. I mean, to go into, and if I was GSP, I mean, super fights bringing the money, but he's just getting his feet wet right now. I mean, give him another fight. You're asking him to take on the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in mixed martial arts, and I mean, it's just, and I hate to say it, I mean, is it the smartest move? I mean, would GSP want to have maybe one more fight or another fight under his belt before he takes on Anderson Silva? And I get that Anderson Silva isn't getting any younger, and I get the time's on our side, but I think you could do one more fight for both guys, okay, before they do this fight. And this is just side note, okay, I want to see Anderson Silva defend the middleweight title one more time, and I want to see Anderson Silva fight Jon Jones, okay? I want to see Georges St-Pierre versus Diaz. I want to see some other fights in regards to that. I know GSP versus Silva was the talk of the town, but that was before Jon Jones came into town. Jon Jones is without a doubt one of the top pound-for-pound fighters as well. I think Silva versus Jon Jones makes a lot of sense, and I think that would be my ideal quote-unquote super fight to be made. So, I mean, that's just that's how I feel. I mean, however you feel, that's fine. Love to hear about it, but I think Jones versus Silva is the ideal super fight, and I think you could think of plenty of other fights for GSP as well. And that's not a shot at where I think he's valued in the pound-for-pound list, and not saying he's not worthy of a super fight, but I want to see Jones versus Silva. That's my perspective. And you know what? If GSP versus Silva happens, you know, I have no problem watching it, but it's something I don't have any interest in right now. So that's just my take. I mean, UFC 154 was awesome. I mean, the main event itself lived up to the hype. We'll see what happens moving forward. That's just my 2 cents on everything that happened at UFC 154 and everything moving forward in regards to super fights and potential matchups. So, hope everybody enjoyed last night, and that's why for this edition. It's Kyle Delaney signing off. I'm out of here.